There's a moment when someone tries to hurt you emotionally, when they throw words designed to cut deep, when they attack what matters most to you, and something inside you just doesn't break. You feel the impact, but you don't crumble. You hear the insult, but you don't react. You see the manipulation, but you don't take the bait. And in that moment, you realize something powerful has shifted. You've become emotionally untouchable. But most people never reach this state. They spend their entire lives as emotional targets, reacting to every slight, bleeding from every criticism, drowning in every wave of drama that crashes over them. They think sensitivity is depth, that feeling everything makes them more human, that emotional availability equals emotional intelligence. But Machiavelli would have laughed at this modern delusion, because in a world where emotions are weapons, the person who can't be emotionally manipulated holds all the cards. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how to build what Machiavelli would call your secret shield. Not through coldness, not through cruelty, but through strategic emotional detachment that makes you immune to the psychological games others play. This isn't about becoming heartless. It's about becoming untouchable. And once you master this, everything changes. The people who used to drain you suddenly lose their power. The situations that used to destroy your peace become meaningless noise. The emotional chaos that used to control your life becomes something you observe rather than experience. Here's what no one tells you about emotional manipulation. It only works when you give it permission to work. Every time you react defensively to criticism, you're giving that criticism power over you. Every time you feel hurt by someone's rejection, you're allowing their opinion to define your worth. Every time you get angry at someone's behavior, you're letting them control your emotional state. You think you're being authentic, but what you're really being is controlled. Machiavelli understood something that most people never will. In any interaction, there are only two positions. You're either in control of the emotional frame, or you're being controlled by it. There's no neutral ground. There's no equal partnership in emotional dynamics. Someone is always directing the energy, and someone is always responding to it. The question isn't whether this is happening. The question is which position you're occupying. Most people occupy the reactive position without even realizing it. They let others set the emotional tone of every conversation. They mirror the energy that's thrown at them. They defend themselves when attacked, comfort others when they're upset, get excited when others are celebrating, and feel guilty when others are disappointed. They think this makes them empathetic, but what it really makes them is predictable. And predictable people are easily controlled people. But here's where it gets interesting. The person who doesn't react emotionally isn't cold or unfeeling. They are strategically detached. They feel the emotions, but they don't let the emotions feel them. They observe their own emotional responses like a scientist studying data, then choose consciously how to respond. This isn't suppression. This is mastery. And mastery creates mystery. Mystery creates power. Think about the most emotionally powerful people you've encountered. Not the loudest ones, not the most dramatic ones, but the ones who seemed untouchable. When they spoke, others listened. When they were silent, others felt uncomfortable. When they were criticized, they barely blinked. When they were praised, they didn't glow with validation. They existed in their own emotional bubble, unaffected by the emotional weather around them. That's what we're building here. The first law of emotional untouchability is this: never let someone else's emotional state become your emotional responsibility. This sounds simple, but it's the foundation that most people never lay properly. They feel guilty when others are upset. They feel pressured to fix other people's moods. They absorb anxiety from anxious people, anger from angry people, sadness from depressed people. They become emotional sponges, soaking up every feeling in their environment until they can't tell which emotions are theirs and which ones they've absorbed from others. But Machiavelli would tell you, this is the fastest way to lose all personal power. Because the moment you make someone else's emotions your problem, you give them control over your internal state. They don't even have to ask for this control. You hand it over voluntarily every time you try to manage their feelings instead of managing your own response to their feelings. Here's how this plays out in real life. Someone comes to you upset about their problems. Instead of listening and offering perspective, you absorb their stress and make it yours. Someone criticizes your work. Instead of evaluating the criticism objectively, you take it personally and defend yourself emotionally. Someone tries to make you feel guilty for setting a boundary. Instead of holding firm, you cave because you can't stand the discomfort of their disapproval. Each time this happens, you're training yourself and others that your emotional state is negotiable, that it can be influenced, controlled, manipulated by external forces. You're advertising your emotional weak spots and inviting people to press on them whenever they want to get a reaction from you. The emotionally untouchable person operates differently. They maintain what Machiavelli would call sovereign emotional territory. Their internal state belongs to them alone. They don't take responsibility for how others feel, and they don't give others responsibility for how they feel. They exist in their own emotional ecosystem, observing the emotional chaos around them without getting pulled into it. This doesn't mean they're indifferent to others' pain. It means they understand the difference between empathy and absorption. They can care about someone's struggle without making that struggle their own. They can offer support without taking on the emotional burden. They can be present for others without losing themselves in the process. But here's where most people get confused. They think emotional detachment means becoming cold, distant, or uncaring. They think it means shutting down their emotions or pretending not to feel anything. This is completely wrong. True emotional detachment isn't about feeling less. It's about feeling more clearly. It's about experiencing your emotions fully while not being controlled by them. It's about maintaining your center even when everything around you is spinning out of control. Machiavelli knew that the most dangerous person in any room isn't the angriest or the loudest. It's the calmest, the one who remains steady when others are losing their minds, the one who thinks clearly when others are drowning in emotion, the one who makes decisions based on logic and strategy rather than impulse and feeling. This person becomes a reference point that others unconsciously defer to, because stability is magnetic in a world of emotional chaos. The second law of emotional untouchability builds on the first. Never explain your emotional boundaries to people who violate them. This is where most people sabotage their own emotional sovereignty. They set a boundary, someone pushes against it, and then they spend energy justifying why the boundary exists. They explain their feelings, defend their limits, and argue for their right to emotional space. But explanation is validation seeking in disguise. When you explain why you won't tolerate certain behavior, you're implicitly asking for permission to have that boundary. You're suggesting that your emotional limits need to make sense to others before they can be respected. You're opening up your internal rules for external negotiation. The emotionally untouchable person doesn't explain their boundaries. They enforce them, silently, consistently, without drama or justification. Someone crosses the line, they step back. Someone tries to manipulate them emotionally, they go neutral. Someone attempts to make their problems into shared problems, they redirect firmly, but without explanation. This creates something powerful. It creates certainty around your emotional territory. People learn quickly that certain approaches don't work with you, not because you've told them so, but because they've experienced it. They've felt the wall, the limit, the place where your accommodation ends and your sovereignty begins. This is just the beginning of building your emotional shield. Because once you understand these foundational principles, we can start constructing the advanced techniques that make you truly untouchable. The methods that allow you to navigate any emotional manipulation, disarm any psychological attack, and maintain your center even in the most chaotic situations. But first, you need to master these basics, because everything else we're going to cover builds on this foundation of emotional sovereignty and boundary enforcement. The third law takes this deeper. Silence becomes your most powerful weapon when others are trying to provoke an emotional response. Most people fill every uncomfortable pause with words. They explain, justify, defend, reassure. They can't stand the tension of unexpressed emotion, so they talk their way through it. But this is exactly what emotional manipulators count on. When someone insults you, they expect defensiveness. When they criticize you, they anticipate justification. When they try to guilt you, they're waiting for accommodation. Your reaction is the fuel that feeds their manipulation. Take away the fuel, and the fire dies. Machiavelli would have recognized this immediately. The person who speaks first in a confrontation often loses control of the frame. The person who remains silent forces others to fill the void, and in filling it, they reveal their true intentions. They expose their desperation. They show their hand. Here's what happens when you master strategic silence. Someone throws an emotional attack your way. Instead of reacting, you pause. You look at them steadily. You let the weight of their words hang in the air between you. You don't defend, don't explain, don't counterattack. You just exist in the space they've created with their aggression. This does something to them that they're not prepared for. They expected a reaction, a defense, an emotional response they could work with. Instead, they get nothing. Their attack lands on armor they can't penetrate. The energy they threw at you has nowhere to go except back to them. And suddenly, they're the one feeling uncomfortable. They're the one looking desperate. They're the one who seems out of control. But here's the crucial part. Your silence can't be passive withdrawal. It has to be active presence. You're not hiding from the confrontation. You're commanding it through stillness. There's a difference between running away from emotional conflict and standing unmoved in the center of it. One signals weakness. The other signals absolute strength. The fourth law reveals something most people never discover. You become emotionally untouchable, not by avoiding emotional situations, but by entering them from a position of complete detachment. This sounds paradoxical, but it's the key to true emotional immunity. Most people try to protect themselves by avoiding confrontation, staying away from drama, surrounding themselves only with people who validate them. They think emotional safety comes from emotional isolation, but this creates a false strength that crumbles the moment it's tested. You haven't become strong. You've simply avoided discovering how weak you still are. True emotional untouchability comes from being able to walk into any emotional storm and remain unchanged by it. It comes from being so centered in your own emotional reality that external emotional chaos can't knock you off balance. It comes from developing such strong emotional boundaries that you can engage with emotional manipulation without being manipulated by it. This is advanced territory. It means you can listen to someone attack your character without taking it personally. You can watch someone try to guilt you without feeling guilty. You can observe someone's emotional breakdown without absorbing their panic. You can be present for someone's anger without becoming angry yourself. You can witness someone's attempts to control you without feeling the need to prove they can't. But this level of detachment isn't natural. It's trained. And the training ground is daily life. Every small emotional challenge is practice for the bigger ones. Every minor manipulation attempt is preparation for the major ones. Every person who tries to push your emotional buttons is teaching you where those buttons are so you can disconnect them. The fifth law is where most people fail completely. Never seek emotional validation from the same people who emotionally violate you. This seems obvious, but watch how people actually behave. Someone criticizes them harshly. Then they spend weeks trying to prove that person wrong. Someone rejects them coldly. Then they chase that person's approval even harder. Someone treats them poorly. Then they work overtime to win that person's respect. This is emotional insanity. You're asking the person who proved they don't value you to suddenly start valuing you. You're seeking emotional nourishment from someone who just poisoned your emotional well. You're trying to get validation from someone who clearly enjoys withholding it. Machiavelli would have seen this as the ultimate form of self-sabotage, because every time you seek emotional repair from your emotional attacker, you're training them that their attacks work. You're showing them that their disapproval has power over you. You're advertising your emotional desperation to the exact person most likely to exploit it. The emotionally untouchable person does the opposite. When someone shows you who they are emotionally, you believe them immediately. You don't give them multiple chances to prove they're different. You don't make excuses for their behavior. You don't hope they'll change. You simply recalibrate your emotional investment accordingly and move forward. This creates something powerful in your emotional ecosystem. People learn that emotional manipulation doesn't work with you, not because you've told them so, but because they've experienced the consequences. They've felt your energy withdraw. They've noticed your investment decrease. They've seen you redirect your attention elsewhere. And most importantly, they've realized that their emotional games don't produce the reactions they're looking for. The sixth law completes the shield. Your emotional reactions become strategic choices rather than automatic responses. This is the final transformation from emotional victim to emotional sovereign. Instead of reacting to emotional stimuli, you respond to them. Instead of being controlled by your emotions, you direct them. Instead of letting others determine your emotional state, you choose it consciously. This doesn't mean suppressing your emotions or pretending not to feel them. It means creating space between the emotional trigger and your emotional expression. In that space, you regain choice. You can feel anger without expressing it. You can experience hurt without showing it. You can notice manipulation without reacting to it. You can observe your own emotional responses and then decide what to do with them. This is the secret that Machiavelli understood, but never wrote directly about. True power isn't the ability to control others emotionally. It's the ability to remain emotionally uncontrolled by others. It's the capacity to feel fully while responding strategically. It's the skill of maintaining your emotional center while everyone around you loses theirs. When you master this, something remarkable happens. You stop being an emotional target. People can't push your buttons because you've disconnected them. They can't manipulate your feelings because your feelings aren't available for manipulation. They can't control your responses because your responses have become choices rather than reflexes. And that's when you realize you've built something most people will never possess. You've constructed Machiavelli's secret shield, not from metal or stone, but from disciplined detachment and strategic emotional sovereignty. You've become the person who can walk through any storm and emerge unchanged, not because you didn't feel the wind, but because you refused to let it determine your direction. But here's what happens next, and this is where the real transformation occurs. Once you become emotionally untouchable, the entire social dynamic around you shifts. People start treating you differently without you saying a word. They become more careful with their words around you. They think twice before trying to manipulate you. They respect your boundaries before you even have to enforce them. Why? Because your energy now carries a warning that operates below the level of conscious awareness. You've become unpredictable in the best possible way. They can't calculate how you'll respond because your responses are no longer automatic. They can't push specific buttons to get specific reactions because those buttons no longer exist. They can't read your emotional state from your behavior because you've learned to separate what you feel from what you show. This uncertainty creates respect because people instinctively defer to what they cannot fully understand or control. The most powerful part of this transformation isn't what you gain, it's what you lose. You lose the exhaustion of emotional reactivity. You lose the drain of other people's drama. You lose the chaos of uncontrolled responses. You lose the weakness of validation seeking. You lose the burden of managing other people's emotions. And in losing these things, you discover what was always underneath them: clarity, peace, strength, and an unshakable sense of self that no external force can disturb. This is Machiavelli's ultimate lesson, though he never stated it directly. The person who cannot be emotionally conquered cannot be conquered at all, because every other form of power depends ultimately on emotional leverage. Threats work because people fear consequences. Bribes work because people desire rewards. Manipulation works because people want approval or fear rejection. But when you've severed those emotional connections, when you've built that inner fortress of detachment, you become immune to every form of psychological control. You don't become cold or heartless in this process. You become selectively warm. Your emotions become choices rather than compulsions. Your care becomes intentional rather than automatic. Your energy becomes precious rather than freely given. And paradoxically, this makes your warmth more valuable, your emotions more meaningful, and your presence more magnetic. People are drawn to emotional stability in an unstable world. They're attracted to the calm in the center of the storm. They gravitate toward those who seem unshakable, because being near that kind of strength makes them feel safer. You become a refuge for others, not because you absorb their chaos, but because you remain unchanged by it. This is your new reality. Criticism bounces off without leaving marks. Manipulation attempts fall flat without gaining traction. Emotional blackmail fails without producing guilt. Drama swirls around you without pulling you in. Rejection stings without destroying your self-worth. Approval feels nice without becoming necessary. You've achieved what most people spend their entire lives seeking without knowing what they're looking for: complete emotional independence. But remember, this shield isn't built once and then forgotten. It requires daily maintenance, constant awareness, and continuous choice. Every interaction is an opportunity to strengthen it or let it weaken. Every emotional challenge is a chance to prove to yourself that you've truly become untouchable. Every person who tries to disturb your peace is actually helping you confirm that your peace can no longer be disturbed. The path to emotional untouchability isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming who you really are when you're not being controlled by external emotional forces. It's about discovering the version of yourself that exists beneath all the reactions, beneath all the people-pleasing, beneath all the emotional chaos that used to define your daily experience. Machiavelli knew that in a world where everyone is fighting for emotional control, the person who needs none holds all the power. You've just learned how to become that person. Use this knowledge wisely, because once you've tasted true emotional freedom, you'll never want to go back to being anyone's emotional prisoner again. The shield is complete. You are untouchable. Now watch how the world responds to the person you've become.